presentations and workshops that we've held over the last 3 years now. And this whole week and everything that we're doing right now is 3 years in the making of us identifying issues in the area and trying to find solutions. So I'm super excited to be hosting the Rich to Reef team this week. We're going to introduce ourselves as we come up to speak. Or do you want me to introduce you? Yeah. So we're going to take turns speaking, and each of us will introduce ourselves as we continue. I'm just going to go grab the clicker, and we'll get started. So just a quick overview of what we're going to be covering today. To start, I'm going to explain a little bit why are we talking about wastewater treatment and why are we talking about nature-based solutions for wastewater treatment here in the area. Next, we'll have a short introduction on biogardens, how they've normally been used in Costa Rica, and also this new system that we're introducing to the area that specifically focuses on treating black water, or water that comes from your toilet. And then we're gonna shift to another type of nature-based system called a composting toilet, and follow that with an announcement about the project that we are launching this year in Nosara, an 18-month project that we'll be implementing. And then we'll have plenty of time for questions, so please hold your questions until the end, especially if you have questions specifically about technical things regarding these systems. There'll be plenty of time for that, in addition to a specific time allocated to discussion. So if you have stories, comments, anything like that, save that for that. We'll have an opportunity to have kind of smaller group discussions to share all of our experiences and our thoughts about these types of systems. And then we're going to wrap up with a very brief survey just to get feedback from you on what you've learned and what you think about these systems, so we can take that into account for our work this year. So just to introduce again, I'm here representing the Wildlife Conservation Association. We have been conducting studies on water quality here in the area over the last 3 years. This project was essentially inspired by the community. Members of the community approached me with concerns about brown foamy water and people getting sick from surfing. And so we started testing the quality of water at these recreational swimming sites in the area. This is a summary of the last year's data. So we conducted 49 weeks of monitoring. We collected 356 samples, and thankfully a majority of those pass water quality standards that are established by the World Health Organization and the EPA. Essentially, those standards determine how likely you are to get sick when you bathe or swim in that water. So when we fail, that means basically on an international level, the quality of that water is not considered acceptable for public health purposes. So you can see also this graph here on the other side shows the number of samples throughout the year and the number that passed or failed. And what we're seeing is that majority of the sites that are failing, that's happening in the rainy season because the rainfall is carrying that pollution into the ocean. So this is a problem, especially at the river mouth of the Rio Nosara, which is a really big area where pollution could come from many different places. But it's also happening in Guiones and in Pilata after very heavy rainfall. And of course, that's a really big concern for an economy that relies primarily on surf tourism. So that leads me to my next point. We've determined that there's pollution here in the area in the ocean, and this is a really big risk, not only to our health, but to our economy and to the marine ecosystem. So as I mentioned, when a site fails, based on the level of bacteria, you're much more likely to contract some kind of illness. So that can be anything from gastrointestinal issues, diarrhea, skin rashes, eye infections. We have been getting reports more and more frequently from the community of, in some cases, some really serious illnesses that are very concerning and very likely as a result of swimming in the water. On top of that, this is a risk that could potentially contaminate drinking water, although that's not currently happening. We don't have signs of that. That's a very big concern for the future. And then from there, as I mentioned, our economy primarily relies on surf tourism. Almost everyone that comes here is coming because they're going to go get into the ocean. So that puts us in a very difficult place. Obviously, it would not be good if this became more frequent, and if word got out that our water was full of sewage, that would be really bad for all of us. And then finally, this is really bad for the marine ecosystem. So this input of nutrients, in addition to nutrients that might come from fertilizers and other sources, all of that drives something called harmful algal blooms, which you've likely heard of as red tide. We just a few years ago had almost a full year of a harmful algal bloom. And basically this is algae that the growth gets spurred by all of these extra nutrients. And in many cases that algae is toxic. So just inhaling or swimming, being around it can be really bad for your health. But it also builds in the tissues of shellfish. So for almost a whole year, there was a ban on shellfish sales. So that then affected, the fishing economy here. And if you do end up eating that, it's in some cases it's lethal. So you can die from eating fish that's contaminated. And this also builds up the food chain. So just a few years ago, there were probably a total of 60 or more sea turtles that washed up dead. You'll find dead fish up on the shores. So again, this is something that has very, very big impacts on the whole marine ecosystem as well. And my final point is that what we've determined, there's, as I mentioned, many sources of pollution, but especially here in the Guiones area, there's a significant source of pollution coming from inadequate septic tanks. So we've confirmed that it's a human source, and we have seen time and time again through all of our work with the local community that a majority of us do not have proper wastewater treatment. So here I've highlighted some of the key problems and reasons why septic tanks are failing here in the area. Primarily, I'd say step one is that a majority of septic tanks are undersized. They're too small, so they're not able to handle the capacity of people the amount of water that's going into that system. The next really big issue we have is that most people do not have a proper drain field. So after your septic tank, there's an area where that water needs to filter through the ground. We have seen everything from tires to construction trash, things that do not belong in a drain field or drain fields that just don't even exist. The other problem we have is that there's a very high water table and there's a lot of ground saturation. So we are essentially at sea level, in which case, honestly, we really shouldn't have a septic tank at all. That's not an option. But the other problem we have is that we have a very drastic change in rainfall. So for half of the year, there's no rain. Everything seems to drain very well. So if you install your system or you test the ground in the dry season, you have no problems. And then 6 months later, at the height of the rainy season, your whole property is flooding and there's nowhere for that water to go. So that's something we see very frequently as well. And then finally, another thing that's very common is maybe the system is more or less should work, but there's improper plumbing or pipe design. So it's really frequent that we see, the pipe is facing the wrong direction, it's turned up, or there's not like a T where it should be, or the elevation is, it's not passively being able to go down that tube. So that's also another really common issue that we're finding here in the area. All of that being said, our organization's been working really closely and hand in hand with the community to learn from you what issues you're facing, what are the challenges, and trying to work with you to come up with solutions. We have put together what we call the wastewater guide, which was an electronic PDF and handout that we've been giving out to the community over the last year. And I'm happy to say all of those resources, all of that information is now available at this website here. So at sustainablenosara.com, you can find a lot of different information contact information for engineers, companies that provide wastewater treatment systems or septic tanks, companies you can contact if you want to test even your drinking water. All of that information is available here. It's a growing resource. We'd love to have your feedback. So if you check it out and have any issues, please don't hesitate to reach out. But just know that I won't be able to dive into all of the details of all the problems we've been handling, everything we've learned, but we have a lot of information and resources for you there. So all of that being said, that's why we're talking about wastewater today, and that's why we're really interested in finding better solutions, because we've seen that the community is really active and motivated to fix these issues, which for me is really exciting, but for a lot of people, budget is a really big limitation. One of the best options that we found in the area is a system called BioNest, which is a contained wastewater treatment system. But unfortunately, that's a little bit outside of some people's budget. And so what we were interested in finding out is, can we find a simpler system that is passive, that doesn't require electricity, has lower maintenance needs, and is something that's available locally with materials and things that we can find here on the ground and not rely on like an international supplier. So that is why I reached out to the team, reached out as well to Ronald at UCR and with the team at Ridge to Reefs to see if we could find some other options for people that don't have the space, don't have the budget. All of that because many people in their journey to trying to fix their systems, if they don't have the budget, they're trying to find a lower cost option, which many times doesn't work. And then they end up fixing it multiple times over, and in the end are spending just as much, if not more money on a solution that doesn't work for them and doesn't work for the environment. So I'm hoping that with the team here and with this project, we'll be able to solve that issue for the community. Thank you very much. I'm going to hand the microphone over to Ronald Aguilar, who's from the University of Costa Rica. And he is going to be introducing how biogardens have been used currently in Costa Rica.
Okay. Okay. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Vanessa, Paul, Ricardo, and Kelly for inviting me to this workshop. For me, it's really important to be here because I'm working for a better environment. And to see you here make me more stronger because I know that you want that too, to have a better world for us. I work at the University of Costa Rica in the Biosystems and Agricultural Department. And I am here because I have this project, the C2451, that is about how BioGarden has been working here in Costa Rica. You are not alone. There are, you are not alone. And we are in this concept. We need water, we need food, and we need energy. All these three resources are together, are related. If we want food, we need energy and we need water. And if we need energy, we need water and we need food. And under this concept, we are under the climate change effects, and then we are more and more people. And we need those resources. And one way to recover those resources is to implement technologies that recover the residues we are producing. And one of these residues is wastewater. Wastewater is a resource, it's not a residue. And this kind of technology, the biogarden, is one way to recover the water, and the nutrients are in the wastewater. And also, well, Paul, Kelly, and Ricardo are working with that really similar technology that is the biogarden. And you are not alone. That's really important. You have to know that you are not alone. This kind of unitary system that you can put in the backyard of your house is simple. And in this map, you can see 81 uh, different biogarden systems that are already in Costa Rica. And those systems are working. Uh, and you can get this link. I can share that link with you. And you can see all the information of those places. You can see how big is the system. For example, you can go um, to this one, to Poas. You can click on there. And you can see where it's located, Alajuela, in Poas. And you can see information like what kind of plants is this person using in this place. And you can go down, and then you can see some pictures. You can click on there. And you can see how simple is this. There is no, there is labor, but it's not too hard. And you can pass, and you can see how the system is implemented. And then we can go to Guanacaste to show you some examples here in Tamarindo. For example, go there. No, scroll. Yeah, the one that says La Garita. And please go to the first picture. Yeah. So this is the kind of system um, Paul, Ricardo, and Kelly wants to implement something similar, but it's really easy to implement this. You need that kind of grease trap and then some chambers to reduce solids, and then the nature. That's what we need. We have to use what we already have over there to recover, to reclaim the water. You can pass the picture, please. Si no salga un toquecito y... Okay. And yeah, and you can see how these things work. This is the raw wastewater, and then if we go to the next picture, you can see how beautiful is this. And then after that, in this case, there is a final chamber in which the water that is already treated is used for irrigation. So in this region, where it has really dry conditions, you can use this treated water for irrigation and even for the toilets. Why do we need potable, drinkable water for the toilets? So you can see he installed a pump to irrigate the garden. So now he has, during the dry season, a beautiful garden. Okay? So this I think I'm done. This is a small introduction. Let's go to the presentation again. And I think this is the last slide I have. And we have found those systems at 5 meters over the sea level, up to 2,000 meters over the sea level over the sea. In San Gerardo de Dota, that is a beautiful place. And this is important. I am an engineer, and I need data to show that the systems are working. And this is one of the parameters we need to test in the water. This is chemical oxygen demand. And as you can see here, the raw wastewater that is coming into the wetland or the biogarden is about 1,000 milligrams DQO per liter. And at the end of the system is about 150. There are a lot of places that are 50 or less than that, and there are few places that need something else to reduce that, and we are working on that. And this is just for the Monteverde region that I'm working with them too. And there are some hotels that already have, and there is a brewery, cerveceria, okay? Yeah, that one. And that's because, and that's why I have this number too high because of that, and also this one. But the system works, and it's something we can have over there. I have been in a hotel in Playa Dominical, and if you walk through that hotel, what you can see is a garden, but what is there is a treatment system, and people does not realize that something is happening there. Okay, and thank you.
So I'm going to talk to you all about a very similar system that we, let's see, let me, yeah. I'm going to talk to you about a very similar system to the biogardens. Huh? What? Oh, I'm sorry. So my name is Paul Sturm. I'm the executive director of Ridge to Reefs, and I'm the director of, we have a team of engineers, biologists, and agronomists like Ricardo back there. And really, it's the combination of being able to think about water, think about plants, think about how Mother Nature has done these things for an eternity, millions of years in terms of provisioning clean water. And what we're trying to do is look at those processes that get you to clean water and mimic those in our treatment systems. And it's very simple. It's really not very difficult. But in a lot of cases, this hasn't been done. And I think one of the reasons that I got into this is that I was spending a lot of time working on reducing pollution to coral reefs, really around the world. And I just kept seeing sewage after, sewage being an issue. And I was working on sometimes agriculture or urban runoff, those things. And I'm like, I can't keep ignoring the sewage that I'm seeing everywhere. So we started working on developing these type nature-based systems to treat wastewater so that we could start addressing one of the major issues that we're seeing everywhere. And so this is one of the systems that we've developed. And really, what we're trying to do is have an aerobic treatment environment. This happens to be sand. Sometimes we add some biochar, which is just like a wood-based carbon source. And that's also in like a Brita filter or a Berkey filter. We use activated carbon all the time to clean water. So we're just using some of those natural sources or creating those natural things that can help us clean water. And then the key thing that we have here is aerobic bacteria. So we have bacteria that break down different contaminants in the environment. And so those aerobic bacteria are located here. And then we also utilize wood chips, often from invasive species that we're trying to manage, invasive trees and other things that don't necessarily belong here. And the idea is they're a carbon source for anaerobic bacteria. And those anaerobic bacteria are living on that carbon source. And then when pollution comes through, they're breaking down that pollutant. So there's a whole bunch of species that are aerobic, and there's a whole bunch of species that are anaerobic. And you need both of them to really clean water to the nth degree or to a really high level. And that's really what we're trying to do. And so we have a drainage at the bottom that comes out sort of at the middle. So the water has to go through this system. And then we also are often using plants. So we're getting phytoremediation at the same time. And so what we're trying to do is really use a bunch of different practices to clean up that water. Basic natural services. And so this is an example that we built at a wastewater treatment plant in Honolulu to have it tested, to make sure it was performing the way, because now after getting this certified in Hawaii, they're able to use this across the Hawaiian Islands. And Hawaii is someplace that after learning about how much pollution there are 88,000 cesspools, like basically, a hole in the ground, with a like a pipe, like a concrete pipe hole in the ground. And very often that water is just going right into the groundwater, right out to the ocean. And people are getting staph infections. I have a friend who's a marine biologist that she had so many staph infections and MRSA infections. MRSA is an antibiotic-resistant pathogen that she had to stop being a scuba diver. She had to stop doing her job, go learn computers and mapping, because they said you're becoming so compromised, immunocompromised, that, and the same thing has happened to surfers, like people who were really great surfers, that they were surfing in areas with a lot of contamination, and they had to quit surfing. Now they're doing snowboarding and other things, but it's kind of shocking. And so this is just showing, like, you have this anaerobic sand layer, and the wood chip layer is what was biochar. And again, we're using that biochar to also filter out different contaminants that may be in there. And I'll talk more about those in a minute. And then evapotranspiration is another important one, because the more water these plants take up out here, the less water gets discharged to the environment. And so very often we want to use plants both in our treatment system but also in our leach field, so that we can minimize what actually goes to the environment. This is some of the data where we're able to remove 87% of total nitrogen, and that's to the, that's water that's going into the groundwater, that's going into the ocean. Sometimes it would be going into our drinking water sources when we're drinking from wells and that sort of thing. So, and nitrogen's a key parameter in terms of these red tides and harmful algal blooms in general. Phosphorus is also important for freshwater algal blooms. So, that's something else that we're trying to reduce. And these systems can reduce the water volume by 15 to 20% or even more. And then reducing sediments. I recently sent a bunch of samples to Texas A&M, and we're removing 94 to 100% of antibiotics that are coming through these systems. And again, when antibiotics get into I was reading a study the other day, and the main pathway for antibiotics getting into the environment is our wastewater. So it goes into our groundwater, it goes, it gets discharged to rivers, and then you start having antibiotic-resistant pathogens that are being developed in nature. And so, again, and then other pharmaceuticals are also very problematic, and usually aren't treated by wastewater treatment plants, but we're able to remove a lot of those. And remember, ultimately, everything that gets discharged to the ground or a river is ultimately going to the ocean. Again, this is just showing, like, these more conventional engineering systems where you have pumps and blowers and shut-off valves and all those things. A lot of things that can break. I look at that, well, that's a lot of things that can break, and that's a lot of things that are going to have to be ordered from somewhere else. A lot of they might come from China or Japan, and these systems work, don't get me wrong, but they don't work as well as Mother Nature, and they're a lot more expensive, and they break, and then you have to order parts, and so what happens is a lot of these systems don't function most of the time. Or, you go out and survey these systems, maybe 50% are working at any given point in time. So again, just simplifying the way we're trying to solve these kinds of problems. This is a system that we built in Maui, and this happens to be the house of a plumber, so it was really good. And he's, he heard about the system that we're developing, and he's like, he's totally on board, wanted to study it, wanted to see it. And we learned a lot about plumbing from him. We're scientists. We're dumb when it comes to plumbing. Let me tell you, not that dumb, but we're pretty dumb when it comes to plumbing. And so it was really refreshing for us. We learned a lot in that process. And so the idea, we excavated a hole. This is, we put a liner in it. Again, we want to clean that water to a very significant degree before we discharge it to the environment. And then here we're putting in the wood chips. This is going to the, this is going to the leach field. And let's see. This is where they're starting to fill it with like a sand or an aggregate. And then also starting to construct the leach field in the back here. And this is kind of a manifold that goes on top before it goes into the filter itself. So we're trying to distribute that flow as much as we can, so we're getting as much treatment. We're trying to get uniform distribution into that manifold, into that media. Just a few more pictures of the construction. And then often we're planting vetiver grass, or in this case, we're able to do this system completely underground. He didn't want any vegetation on the bioreactor garden itself. He wanted it to be in the leach field, just in the leach field. And then it's screening him from his neighbors. His neighbor had like a big truck out there or something, a dump truck. And he's like, oh, now I can't see the dump truck anymore. So again, I think trying to utilize these things in a way that they benefit, our lot or whatever we're trying to do. This is another project that we did. This is for a 27-room hotel and restaurant. This is down in Puerto Rico, in Guanica in Puerto Rico. And this was kind of immediate. There's a big septic system right here. And then we run it through this system here. And after only a couple months, you can see the vetiver grass has really, gone gangbusters. So it doesn't take long to establish at all. This also happened in a place where it was really high water table. So, we're kind of proving that this can work even when you have a high water table. One of the problems with traditional septic tanks is that sometimes they're like a marshmallow. And so when, the water comes up, it's trying to push that up out of the ground. Whereas when we use a liner, yes, it can kind of give and take more. It's not going to act like a marshmallow necessarily. Again, that's that same system, and it's been in the ground 5 or 6 years now, and it really required very little maintenance by the folks, and the folks that manage the grounds. They do the maintenance, and it's just very minimal. It's basically just like any other landscaping. They just cut back the vetiver grass occasionally. Right here is the leach field. So with the vetiver grass, a lot of times we can really shrink the size of a leach field. If you look at the engineering specifications for leach fields, a lot of times they're like, oh, it needs to be the size of this room. And you're like, that's the size of my yard. That's not going to work. So I think really trying to figure out how to shrink the size of these systems is critical. This is just a picture of a few different systems. Like this is in American Samoa, where there's just a septic tank, and this is for like a pre-K classroom that they were building. So these systems don't have to be very large to improve the water quality before discharge to the environment. And they can come in different formats, and they can be pretty and use, native species of hibiscus and other things. So they're pretty versatile, and they don't necessarily have to have vegetation on them in the treatment system itself. This is a project that we recently did in Palau, and this is really interesting because this was somewhat of a community in need, in particular a household that had folks with limited mobility, like I think the one person was blind, and food security is really an important aspect. So our colleagues in Palau said, look, let's try to integrate tree crops and things like that into the leach field. So here we have the bioreactor garden, and they get 120 inches of rain a year, so we covered that with a liner and kind of mounded that, and still planted vetiver grass and tea trees and other things through that. And then we went into an agroforestry system with vetiver grass and breadfruit trees, plantains, bananas, pineapples, other things like that. And you can see the water in the septic tank looks like this. And basically, after it comes through the bioreactor garden, very clean. And I can show some more statistics on that bioreactor garden itself and how it's performing. The other thing that we're doing in Maui as well is, instead of just using aggregate or sand, sand is a precious resource in Maui because historically they buried the dead in sand. And so digging up sand anywhere in Hawaii is a bad idea and is basically banned. So for a while they started importing sand from Canada, which doesn't make a lot of sense when you're in Maui and you're getting sand from Canada so that you can build homes and filter water and things like that. So we have a project where we're going to begin crushing glass into sand to use in that filtration component and use in construction and things like that. This is just some data. This is from Stony Brook University that's built very similar systems, a bioreactor system without the vegetation, and they're showing very high removal of a lot of pharmaceuticals, personal care products, and things like that. We ran some of that data at Texas A&M from one of our projects in Hawaii, and we're getting very high removal rates. You can see antibiotics, epileptic drugs, antidepressant, SSRIs, we were able to remove 100% of those and 100% of a number of the antibiotics. So again, I think it's really critical to even our wastewater treatment plants. And we're taking water from a wastewater treatment plant after it went through, then we're cleaning it up further so that we're not releasing this stuff into the environment. And I think that this is a critical aspect going further. Sometimes they're spending like $10 million to do tertiary treatment at a wastewater treatment plant, and it's not removing this stuff. And so spending 1/10 of that, instead of building a whole new plant, build nature-based systems at 1/10 the cost and remove the stuff, remove the nutrients and remove the pharmaceutical contaminants. Just a few of the benefits. I probably hit most of these in terms of reduction in algal blooms, can be aesthetically pleasing, low maintenance, can be designed for water reuse. I think that the water reuse component is so important here because, in 3 or 4 days being here, I'm like, oh my God, they're running out of water. And look at the pace of development and think about the whole coast. And I'm like, this is a disaster waiting to happen. And so it's really critical to start using water and recycling water on sites. And doing it in a way, we have to do these things scientifically. We can't do them willy-nilly because that's another mess. Even growing food, and I think that some of these things are really important in terms of impoverished communities or under-resourced communities. making this a part of our food security is really critical in terms of equity and moving forward. In Hawaii, they're asking people to pay like $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 to upgrade their cesspools, and they're getting nothing. They're getting nothing in return directly. And so part of it is like, how can we figure out ways that people are actually getting some sort of return on their investment? Yes, they're helping out the environment. They're helping out those sorts of things. They're improving the water quality of beaches, but I think most people want some sort of return on their investment. So, and then, certainly there are system limitations in terms of space. It's important. You need some space to be able to do these systems, and not all sites have enough space. So these are just, again, is the system for you? Ample some space. Particularly if you already have a septic tank, it's relatively easy to add one of these systems between that and your existing leach field. And generally, we try to do these systems without electricity. I never want to rely on a pump for anything, because eventually that pump is going to fail and it's going to break, and then someone's going to be unhappy. And if it's me, I just don't want to. I don't want to go there. But that sometimes we do have to put a pump in these systems if a site is super flat or something like that. But even then, we try to do it as passively as possible. And I always want redundancy. So maybe it's a solar pump with electricity backup or whatever, trying to keep it in a way that minimizing failure. So anyway, I don't want to go on to. So I probably went over my time, but you get me worked up, and that happens.
That's a question about the water reuse. Like, what is the end of that system that then, like, how does the water get collected so that it can be reused?
So what you would have is like a cistern, or you would have something after the bioreactor garden. You would have a cistern, and depending on your site, you may need a pump to get it to some of the higher areas. But again, thinking about redundancy on the pipe. But ideally, you'd want to gravity flow that system. The other thing you could do is you could use a solar pump to just pump it somewhere higher on your site to another cistern, and then have that distributed via gravity. And then so when the sun is shining, it pumps it up to that other spot, and then, yeah.
So it'll collect into the system.
Okay. Yes.
It will be instead of the leach field, sort of, it will be a reservoir, right?
Say that again?
Instead of a leach field, after the bioreactor, it will be
Yes.
a water reservoir.
Yes. Yes. That's the best way to go. Yeah. Thank you. Kelly.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Kelly Harris. I am an ecological engineer with Ridge to Reefs, and I'm excited to be the lucky person who gets to talk about compost toilets. I'm actually really excited about this topic. So the bioreactor garden is a really awesome choice if you want to use regular toilets, right? You want to flush your toilet, you want to reuse that water, which is, a good option for a lot of people. But for those people who want to take this one step farther, or for those who have water shortages or, certain limitations that make a regular system not practical, a composting toilet is going to do the job. Maybe. We'll see. So I say compost toilet, but actually it's a dry toilet, and a composting system is a more accurate way to describe this, because the toilet itself is not going to compost for you, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. So first and foremost, when some people think about composting toilet systems, they just think about something really, really basic, simple, a bucket, something that maybe doesn't look super nice. But these are a couple of photos of composting toilets that are outside, really nice architecture. So you can make a compost system look really good and feel like, you know, a normal type of system. Obviously, these are outside. Not everybody is going to want to have their system in a sort of outhouse situation. But for some people that works. You can also have them in your home if you have the proper design. So on the left, you have a really, really basic compost system, and I'll talk a little bit more about how this works. But essentially, the dry toilet, it doesn't have any water in it. So you can have a reservoir, it can be a bucket, it can be a bigger reservoir. I'll show you that in a little bit. And basically, you do your thing, and you just cover it with a cover material. So anything that smells, cover it up with some sawdust, some whatever scraps you have, leaves. People use a lot of different things depending on where you live. So that's basically it. And then when you are done with that, you are going to have to take it to a compost pile and process it a little bit. But you know, the main benefit of this is you're not flushing anything. And on the right is a sort of commercial kind of toilet. So that has a little chamber, and you'll see these in RVs and campers, tiny homes, and you can use something like that. I'd say one of the main limitations is the reservoir is very small, and the smaller it is, the more often you have to replace it and do the work. So what we'll be talking a little bit about is the fact that these systems do require maintenance. So if you're not somebody who's going to take the time to empty the tank and do it properly, probably not for you. Okay, so a lot of people ask, like, why? Why even go there? So this is a really wonderful diagram of a broken human nutrient cycle. We all think about human waste as like toxic waste, but we see manure and waste from other animals as a resource that we use to grow food and all these things. So really, we have the same thing. We're all animals as well. Obviously, we have some pharmaceuticals in our system and other things now that make things a little more complicated. However, in a broken system, you have, you're excreting, and it just goes out into the environment. So it's just getting lost. And so as a result, we have to develop chemical fertilizers in order to grow our food, in order to eat, which we excrete, goes out into the environment, broken cycle. In an intact cycle, it's a circle. We're actually able to return our quote-unquote waste materials, our resource, into the soil, grow food, eat the food, all of these things. Now, a lot of people might see this and say, whoa, like, isn't that dangerous? And we're going to cover that a little bit later, how a lot of these are misconceptions, just culturally, socially, and there are necessary processes you have to go through in a compost system to make sure that what you're producing is safe for you and for the environment. Okay, so in order for this to work properly in your dry toilet, like I said before, you have to cover everything with ample organic material after each use. If you do this, it will not smell bad. It won't smell. A lot of people think it will not. So if you just cover it up, it covers all the smells. And that's what you do with your toilet. I think here, this one is connected. There's a tube, and it goes down into a concrete sort of tank underneath this elevated platform. And an interesting thing too about this system, which is actually in the Nosara area, is that this over here is like an extra hole. So every 6 months they move this toilet between the holes because you want to have your compost cure for a certain amount of time. So you let it rest, you move over to the other one, use that one, move it over to the other one. So it's a really cool design, and you'll see with these systems there's a lot of designs. I cannot possibly cover every single one today, and the one that you would choose is what would work for you in your context. In order for this to be, sanitary and work well is you need to have a proper seal in your system. Because as you can see, it's relatively open to the environment. It's got some things in there that bugs are going to want to get into. So you want to make sure it's sealed properly. But this one over here to the right is a big receptacle underneath a toilet. this is the same system actually. So as you can see, that's a very big receptacle that they move with a dolly every couple of weeks to empty into the compost pile. But you want to close the lid, which is not what we're showing here. Okay, and if you have people using your toilet who aren't used to it, you want to have instructions, you want to tell them how to use it. And it's really, really basic, but basically you just need to cover the material. You can put toilet paper in the toilet, it's gonna decompose, and then that's pretty much it, but it's good to have some instructions. So in order to have a compost toilet system, you need to have a dry toilet, and then you need to have a compost pile. So your compost pile needs to be, I would separate it away from your toilet just to kind of reduce cross-contamination of insects and things that are gonna get into a compost pile. But there's some steps for success for a composting system. And this is a human waste or like humanure compost pile, but you can actually add food scraps and everything to it. And actually that's gonna be your best compost, because that's out in nature. If you go into the woods or whatever, this is what's actually happening, is all the nutrients from the animals, the things, food falling off the trees, they're all getting processed on the forest floor, and they're just getting recycled. So similar things. You need to have space for this. You need to dedicate space. There's some designs you can have like pallets. It's such a low cost solution. And yeah, you need to make space for it. Some people will just put a big pile on the ground with a liner under it, but this keeps it a lot more tidy. In this environment in particular, you want to make sure that your pile is covered at all times in the rainy season. You don't want excess rain getting into your system, causing the potential for leaching of any of the things that are in the pile that might be dangerous. And we'll talk about this a little bit, that the bacteria, the microbes, are going to be treated in the compost. And if you have dogs and children that are kind of curious, you can also put, additional pallets or anything around this. It doesn't have to be pallets, whatever it is. You need to keep it above the flood zone, which I guess is easier said than done here, but if you can find a way to keep it as dry as possible, then that's amazing. And when you're adding, anything from your toilet to the compost pile, you want to make sure that you have plenty of organic, carbonaceous material in there, leaves, hay, straw, anything like that you can just find in your yard. And you want to have that completely around what you're putting into the compost pile. And essentially what that does is it creates an environment where bacteria can thrive, and they're going to process that waste properly. And it creates a sort of what they call a biological sponge. So it'll soak up urine, it'll soak up all those things. Also important, and we're going to talk about this in a second, is that once your compost bin is full, you don't touch it for 6 months to a year or more, because you need that amount of time for the microbes and the other organisms that are processing it to get it to a place where it's completely processed and safe to use. Okay, so there's really two main treatment processes in this, and the first one is heat. So there are something called thermophilic bacteria, which is essentially heat-loving bacteria that are found in really extreme places in the world, like hot springs and deep sea vents, but they're also found in compost piles. So when you have that amount of nutrients and the right environment, which is just the right carbon and nitrogen in one spot, these bacteria that are everywhere come online. And what they do is they produce enough heat in the middle of this compost pile that they can sterilize and sanitize microbes, worms, parasites, anything that you would find in feces. So this graph kind of shows, one day at 50 degrees Celsius, which it will reach, your compost will reach that, is enough for total pathogen death of all the common diseases that may come from human waste. And if you have a lower temperature than that, it still will work. And here, I don't think we have a problem with temperature. So that's pretty amazing. Again, same thing. And then after the heat, it basically goes through this process, your compost pile, of getting hotter, reaching a thermophilic bacteria kind of peak, killing off those major bacteria, and then when they don't have food anymore, when all the human manure or when all the feces is gone, then it cools down again, and you have other bacteria, fungi, worms, other things processing all the yummy stuff in there. So when you are ready to take it out 6 months to a year later, you have pathogen-free compost that you can then use for your garden, anything really. We recommend putting it on like tree crops, if you want to be safe, not to put it on lettuce or something like that. But you can also, fertilize your garden with it. And this is just to show that a lot of people are terrified of handling, human waste and think that it's dangerous, and it is to a certain point, but septic tanks do not get rid of any of that stuff. So everything that's going into your septic tank is also a biohazard coming out of it. So if you can eliminate water use and sanitize all of that stuff and create fertilizer, for some people that's exciting stuff. There's a lot of FAQs here. I'm not going to necessarily spend the time going through that, but if you have questions for me, chances are they're probably in here, or I'm happy to have a conversation about it. So here's an example of finished compost. It just looks like compost, and you see people smelling it. It doesn't smell like anything, and people just put it on their garden. It's really good stuff. So one of the major benefits of this system is that it's the lowest cost system you can have. You can build this for very, very cheap. You can use locally sourced materials. Obviously, it just takes organic materials that you can find in your backyard. No water used at all. Minimal impact, grows food, and it's legal here. In some places in the United States, you can't do this. So it's actually really awesome that people can do this here, and it's legal. So some of the limitations are, yes, you have to maintain the system. It doesn't have to be difficult, but it is a chore. And sometimes, if you might have to troubleshoot a little bit. Most of the people we've talked to have had to go through a few iterations of systems in order to find something that works for them. So if you're not willing to go there, you're not willing to deal with that, then probably not for you. But as we've also talked about, similar things happen with septic tanks and regular flushing toilets. So it's kind of just a thing we need to get more comfortable engaging with. Generally, it's less culturally, socially accepted, and that comes with its own issues. And you do need space for your compost pile where it's not going to get flooded and rained on all the time. So if you're somebody who's excited about this idea of actually using your body's waste to grow food, then this is probably for you. You kind of need to be somewhat enthusiastic about this system, I think, for it to work for you, or at least be able to connect the dots in your head that, yeah, logically, this makes sense and is safe. You can preserve water, save money. You're gonna want to be willing and able to actually maintain the system. If somebody has physical disability or just not enough time and no willingness, you can't just leave this thing. Your bucket's gonna fill up. You got to do something with that. Yeah, and you need sufficient space. A lot of people don't want to use this if they have a rental property, which makes a lot of sense because most people aren't used to this type of system unless they're coming here for a sort of experience of, eco-friendly tourism. If you are absolutely disgusted by this, then it's probably not for you. Yeah, and we've talked about this before, all the other things. So that's composting systems. Happy to answer any questions y'all have after the presentation. Thank you.
Awesome. I hope that we haven't lost any of you guys yet. We're going to start wrapping up here. I am so pleased to take this opportunity to announce that our organization has just received a substantial grant, 150,000 Canadian dollars, which is about 110,000 US dollars, to start implementing these solutions here in Nosara. This is an 18-month project that we are implementing in the area that consists of 4 different phases. Right now, we're kind of right at the end of the first phase, which consisted primarily in community outreach and engagement. For the last month and a half, and especially this week, I've been speaking with a lot of members of the community, visiting their homes and their businesses to see what their problems are and hear from them. We've also been reaching out, as you saw in some of these photos, to existing systems to see how they work, what challenges they've had, what have been the successes. And we're taking all of that feedback and that information to identify potential sites where we will be soon implementing solutions. So we're expecting to be able to implement solution at least 6 different sites. And those sites will receive the cost of the installation, all of the materials is covered by the grant. And in addition to that, in the process of these installations, we're going to be training at least 2 local professionals on how these systems work and how they get installed. That's phase 2, which we're entering here soon. And then phase 3 is going to be an entire year of monitoring of those systems. So I will be going monthly to these sites to make sure that not only is the treatment effective and that we're removing contaminants, but also we want to hear about the user experience. How is this functioning culturally and socially? What are the benefits? What are the drawbacks? We want to continue to learn from the community's feedback throughout that full year. And after we've completed that year, our plan is to then take everything we've learned and develop educational materials, and really plan for a much larger scale implementation. So we wanted to really we don't want to put the horse before the cart. We want to make sure that this works here in Costa Rica, in this climate, with our local culture, and take that to figure out how we can then implement that large scale. So that will hopefully include also applying for additional funding, and working with more contractors to then really help implement these solutions on a larger scale. So all of that being said, didn't mention directly, so I'll go back. Want to thank our funder. This project is funded by Grand Challenges Canada, which is a nonprofit organization based in Canada that also receives funds from the Canadian government. So all of that being said, the sites that we're looking for, the way that we're prioritizing these sites, we first want to find obviously a site where there's a need for improvement in wastewater treatment. That's not very difficult because almost all of us need that around here. Secondly, we really want to find sites where they're regularly used, so especially not a site where 6 months out of the year no one is using the system. That wouldn't really be ideal for us. The owner must be willing to commit to participating in the project, obviously giving us access to the site for installation, but also being willing to participate throughout the full year. We are prioritizing places where there is a financial need, where maybe there's an interest in doing an improvement, but that hasn't been done because they don't have the financial capacity. And then finally, we're also prioritizing owners that are community leaders, or spaces where it's a public space where the impact can really go beyond just improving that site, but where maybe this person is going to share it with their community, or it's a public space where we can have an event and share how the system works with other people looking to improve their systems. We've identified a lot of sites in need, but they don't all quite fit the bill for different reasons. So especially if you know of anyone, or if you are interested in a compost system, we would love to hear from you. Please reach out. And also, if you know of a site that is really in need of improvement in wastewater treatment, please speak to me after, and we'd love to go have a look to see how we can help. With that, I'm going to open up for questions for any of us, so I can have everyone else come up if we need. And I'm going to have you take the microphone so we make sure that the audience can hear. Let's see. I'm going to do it. Está encendido. There you go. That way the people watching the video can hear.
I have a question, I think it's for Paul, but also could be for you as well. What's the lifespan of the Blackwater area or the gray water source?
Please answer.
What's the lifespan of the or the media?
Yeah, what is
Yes.
a lifespan of like 20 years if
Yeah.
it's done correctly.
Sure,
So
sure.
what is the lifespan of the Blackwater area and of course, the Graywater area?
Sure. So a few of the factors that are important, I think that a functioning septic system ahead of the bioreactor garden, obviously that's important. And I think so if your septic system is functioning like we're, easily 30 years, 50 years. But septic tanks have to be maintained. They should be pumped out or they should be looked at least once a year in terms of how much. The other thing I want to say about septic tanks, which is really important, is they should have two chambers. A lot of places are just putting in septic tanks with one chamber, and that means that your solids are just going to be filling up the whole thing. Whereas you really need the solids filling up on one side, and then they can be sucked out of there by a pumper truck. And so you really want the solids removed before it goes into your system, whether your leach field. But by having a good septic tank in place, these systems should last 30 to 50 years, but particularly because they're mimicking a wetland. Like a wetland doesn't have to be maintained, or these systems are functioning for eternities. But the key is we don't want excess sediment and other things getting to our system. So that's again, it's with maintenance, they should easily last 30 to 50 years. The other thing we think about is the lifespan of those wood chips. And so we try to keep those wood chips watered, in terms of residual volume in there, because like wood in a water that's anoxic can last a long time. Like they'll dig up, underneath a riverbed or something, they'll dig up these old logs that are thousands of years old. So we know that wood chips can last, and so the half-life of a wood chips in that environment is like 40 years, something like that, and that's even assuming some oxygenation. So again, if our wood chips are going to that's just the half-life. It's still going to work at 40 years, and some of these systems have been in place in the Northeast and over 30 years. Wood chip bioreactors, and they're still going strong. So anyway, I think there's, again, with proper maintenance, these should last. They should outlast a typical system because the water going to them is cleaner, and the water going to your leach field is cleaner, or going to your irrigation system is cleaner. So, yeah.
Well, in terms of biogardens that are already in Costa Rica, I have seen systems that were built in 2004. So that's about 20 years. What is really important, as Paul was mentioned, is how the pretreatment is working. So you need to remove all the solids, rice, beans, oil, grease, because those things are going to clog the substrates that are in the biogarden. So what is really important is the maintenance you have to give to the pretreatment system. If you do that, the biogarden is going to last forever, I will say.
Any other questions?
I'm actually in the process of building a permaculture farm, and I'm committed to using both of these systems in different parts of it actually. How do I find trusted engineers or people who know how to implement it? So even though I understand how to work it, I just don't have the time to oversee it and to know that it's going to function correctly.
Yeah, I think my quick answer for that would be that to reach out to us when you get there, and hopefully by that point we're going to have locals that have been implementing the systems that we could recommend. I know of a few people already. We've been speaking to people that have installed it, so I know people with experience. I haven't worked directly with them, so I can't give you like a proper reference. But if you're there already, I could also connect you with some of the people we've been speaking with. Nitsan would be one of them as well.
And I think one of the things that we want to develop over time is having those, kind of identifying who those contractors are. And like, so like Ricardo, we're working with an agronomist who's very interested in these systems in this region. And so, we may be piloting some projects in the next few months and things like that. So we want to develop that capacity locally. We're actually hiring an engineer who is Costa Rican who's going to work at LSU for 3 to 6 months studying like how to optimize these systems, and then potentially come back to Costa Rica. And so the idea is really to kind of hand off this technology and have other people who are passionate about these things really kind of take the mantle after that.
Excellent. Yeah, because I mean, I'm passionate about implementing it, but I also just spend a lot of time farming. Reinvent the wheel.
Thank you. We have another question here. You can pass the mic.
Thank you. Kind of actually on the same vein, Leandro and I work in construction management here. And so what I'm interested in is like the technical data on how this actually works, because like, for example, we saw the initial one with the biogarden in a raised bed, which may or may not be practical, and then we saw it in a hole. We saw a pipe coming up, and it's like, well, water doesn't flow up without a pump. So I didn't quite understand the technical aspect of it. So we have a project that we're going to start like within the next 2 weeks that this could very well work on. There's tons of space, but it's like the technical data on how it works, but then also
The engineering plans and
correct, yeah, and then also the like the septic requirements. So I think I misunderstood in your presentation, but when you're answering Meg, so the traditional septic tank system still exists. This is just in lieu of the leach field.
Yeah, and it's not fully in lieu of a leach field, but it can make your leach field smaller. Or you can go right from a bioreactor garden or a biogarden to a irrigation system. So I don't know what you're planning in terms. Are you planning an irrigation system?
Well, right now we're just kind of looking at like, generally speaking, we use biomass on all projects.
I see. Yeah.
And then it exits the biomass, goes into an irrigation tank that then has like the emergency overflow out of that is a traditional leach field.
I
There's
see.
a pump in the irrigation tank that we use it for the irrigation systems.
Got you. Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, like, again, like the biomass are not cheap, but they work great.
Sure.
But I was wondering if this was like a cost-effective alternative to a biomass, but you still need the septic tanks and things beforehand.
Exactly. I think it is. It is probably less cost. Like, say the infrastructure costs or the materials costs are probably, $2,000 to $5,000 or something, or $2,500 to $5,000. And we also have, engineering plans and designs and that sort of thing that we'd be happy to share. And I think that really some of the critical things are getting the right sand or aggregate, the right, double washed aggregate, and they're fine. There's a lot of fine details, and we're happy to try to help you all through that, so that we want to see these systems used, but we also want, and we want to see them successful as well. So we're happy to coordinate further.
Going to chime in very quick and let you know I'm pulling this up. We had just prepared this table, anticipating questions about cost, size, just to give you a quick understanding of how this compares to a traditional system. So you would need a little bit more space than a traditional septic system, but the cost of the bioreactor garden wouldn't be, in theory, shouldn't be as high as the cost of the biomass system. So it's kind of like an upgrade from traditional septic that would be cheaper, or more cost effective than the biomass system, which is what a lot of people are opting for. Another question.
Just curious what you think in your research so far, the scale of the issue here in Nosara is. And where I'm going with it is, how many homes or businesses do you think would have to switch in order to see material change in the data that they're seeing, for example, in the ocean?
That's a really good question. I don't know if I can answer that directly. What I can tell you is that from my experience, great majority, I feel pretty confident saying that 70 to 80% of the systems in the area are not adequate. They're contributing somehow to pollution. Right now, fortunately, we're not seeing that, we're not detecting that extremely frequently in the ocean yet. But with the rate of growth that I'm seeing, and the bigger concern we have is this is a growing problem. It's not that new properties are doing it properly. Unfortunately, a lot of them are still putting in systems that don't function. So I think we've come a very long way in terms of awareness. The people that can afford it are fixing it, and newer construction, we have a great example here. Newer constructions, I think, now are much more aware of that and just opting for biomass. But our big kind of barrier is people who can't afford it, or who are still unaware, or who, they're not going to spend their money on fixing that. That's like a really big issue. And the really big challenge, I think, as well, is owners that are not present. So we have a huge number of vacation rentals that are managed by property management companies where the owner is not here. And so we've been working on reaching out to property managers to hopefully then be more in touch with owners, but it's going to be challenging. We have a big challenge ahead of us. But I hope my personal goal is that we not be failing any single test within the next 5 to 10 years. I would really love to see that, and I think we can do it. But it's going to take a lot of manpower.
I guess a follow-up to that is, would you rank the issues awareness first and financing or budget second, or budget first and awareness second? Like, what is?
Right now I would say budget first, because I think we've really come a long way in terms of awareness. And even if someone is not aware, if I come and say, like, look, this is paid for, just give me the then I don't feel that there's a big resistance there. So I think that we're now in that finance and also capacity. I think that is a really, really big challenge here. We have, a very select few engineers or professionals that I feel that are doing a really good job. We are way more outnumbered by professionals that mean well and have good intentions, but the job it's not being done properly. And so that's like the other mountain that we have to deal with, is people who try to fix the system, were not successful, and now we have to fix these band-aids that aren't working. So capacity building in addition to the funding, and we need a lot of manpower, professionals that are knowledgeable to make sure that we're not putting all that money to make improvements that don't work either. Any other questions? We're also wanted to open up to discussion. We did want to ask you questions as well, so before I move on, if you have a question for us, please feel free. But we want to also hear from you. Since it's a relatively small group, we could just all speak here and we can pass around the mic, but we want to hear from you. If you have a story or a complaint or comments that you want to share, I don't want to open up Pandora's box, but our big questions that we have for you is, how do you see these systems working in Nosara? What do you think the pros and cons are? And what are your goals for the future of Nosara in terms of water quality?
Just a small little comment. Like Martin said, we're working in construction management. And something that we see very often is the plans from the architects do not include change.
Hold both so we can record it on the video.
Okay. Something that we see from the architects in the plans that we receive from new houses that are still in design is that the architects do not specify a treatment system. They just, stick a septic tank in there. And if the owner of the house is not aware, that a lot of the time just passes through, and the house is built with a regular system and not treatment.
Yeah. Further to that,
Mhm.
a big part of the problem is legislation. The municipality in Sofia, if the engineers put any sort of treatment system on the plans, it has to go through a whole different round of revision, of review, sorry, and there's another permit required that adds $1,000 to $3,000, but more importantly adds X number of months or minimum weeks to the process. And so people, to avoid that, it's kind of unilaterally, they just put septic tank on it, and it's like, oh, the contractor's going to know. Fortunately, again, like on our projects, we make sure that that change happens, but I also know many projects where in town here, where they, again, the contractor just puts like the cheapest possible thing in, and then it leaks. Then the first time the tank gets pumped out, the tank implodes because it's plastic, which should never be used, and then it just forever leaks. So it's kind of like a multi-part problem, and like the legislation, and there's also like there's no. It's not that there's the absence of incentives, but furthermore, it's punitive to do the right thing. So it's a huge problem, like kind of right from the get-go. And then actually on the point of legislation and enforcement, there's just down the street here, like there's a few like long-term offending properties where like if you walk past them in rainy season, it looks and smells and feels like you're walking in a septic field, but it's year over year with seemingly no consequence whatsoever. So that to me is something that I was always curious about, is like everybody knows this and it's right here in Guiones in K section and no one is doing or saying anything, and like that kind of breaks my brain a little bit. But I'm just curious if there is any action that could or should be taken.
I'll leave the mic with you. I can address some of that. Completely aware of everything that you mentioned, and it's a complicated issue, as you can imagine. In terms of policy, unfortunately, I think we're pretty far from there being changes made in the laws. That the regulations themselves are sad, quite frankly. And there's a lot of reasons why those aren't being updated, and I think it's going to be a while before. And then completely aware there's just zero enforcement. So in addition to what you mentioned, there's kind of it's harder to do the right thing in your construction plans. I'm not advising anyone to do this, but what I'm hearing most people are doing, like you said, is they'll just submit the plan with a regular septic tank and then put something different in the ground. They'll put a bionest in the ground. Many people say this in Costa Rica, it's easier to ask for forgiveness than to ask for permission. And from what I understand, if you're doing something that's in favor of the environment, I don't think the ministry is going to be on you if you've done better than you had in your plans. But unfortunately, in many cases, what's happening is what's in the plans is not what goes in the ground. And so the plans meet the minimum requirements, which we already know aren't ideal. But then a lot of the homes I go to don't have a grease trap, which has to be in the ground, or the septic tank isn't two-chambered, which was what was on the drawings, but that's not what in the ground. You can always file denuncias, and that's something I'm happy to share information on how to do that. But unfortunately, what we've also seen there is there's limited funding and resources for them to follow up. Denuncia, sorry, I said that in Spanish. Denuncia is like a complaint. So you can file an environmental complaint with the Ministry of the Environment and with the Ministry of Health. They are obligated to come and follow up on that. But what we've seen is that nothing tends to happen from there down the line. So the bottom line is that ultimately it's our individual responsibility to do the right thing and to spread that awareness to hopefully get this done from the bottom up. I'm really encouraging people, rather than just pointing the finger and filing the denuncia, and go have a conversation with your neighbor, go speak with this person and connect them with the right information and the right resources to see if we can help them make a change. Because in many cases, when I start talking to neighborhoods that have cesspools or problems, everyone's pointing finger at everyone else and no one's taking any action. So that's what I hope we can avoid, that we can all just kind of like share experiences, what have we learned and how can we move forward with this before it becomes a big issue. Because in the end, it's everyone's problem, whether you care about the environment or not. If money is your thing and you've invested here, it's in your best interest that we fix this problem before it gets to be a bigger issue.
I was just going to say, perhaps with this project or a follow-up project, we could potentially do outreach or direct them, to Vanessa or us, or the combination. But I think that when we do have funding in hand, it might be easier to try to take care of some of these problems where the owner may not have to come out of their pocket very far or whatever, because there's existing funding. So I think that and even having some sort of financing, like I could imagine having a nest egg of money and then essentially loaning people money where they're paying it back, but they need to upgrade their system. People, most normal people can't just throw out a big chunk of money, but they can on a monthly basis, $50 or $100 a month, then they could afford the upgrade. And I think if we can get to the point, and I think we were thinking about a grant, like trying to get a grant like that, where you're essentially, and we don't want to be a bank, but if we have to be a bank to get things done, then we'll do it, or we'll partner with a bank so to have that done. So I think
I will mention there's financing available with Banco Nacional for the bionest. You are interested in that, happy to share that information. And if you are interested in a bionest system, we offer it. If you mention our organization, you can get a small discount as well.
That's great.
I think that's fair. So actually, my question is for you guys. You're the good guys that came here today and want to learn and want to do things right. I want to share a little bit of my experience. I just finished building my house. We had a black box of septic, and of course I did my best to educate myself before and to put the right system. But then when they came to install it, it was a real nightmare. And I'm asking you guys, who is installing on site your system, and are they qualified? Did they did some training? I think this is like a big gap that we have, because even if you buy the right equipment, if it's installed wrong, and I needed to redo my septic system 4 times. I made them open it, and I was there. And you just go for an hour, you come back. And so what I've learned from my process, that it is like the real bottleneck is the guy that is doing the work. And is there someone that is there full time to make sure? Usually not. That's what happened to me. So I feel that here we have a point that we should address and find a way maybe to have workshops for these people that are installing the systems, because they have everything. I think it won't matter so much by the cost as well. It's just about knowing how to do it right. Thanks.
I was just going to say, for a lot of my projects, that sometimes we'll be in Puerto Rico, and where we go to the quarry, we look at what we think we're getting, and then this is like for stormwater projects sometimes, and then they come and you see the quality of the material, and I'm like, no, this has to go back. You can't, like, that will completely ruin this practice forever, and like just the quality of the material sometimes. And so that's, so anyway, it's a big challenge in terms of quality control for things to work effectively. And I think that's why we're thinking about, like, maybe we have to containerize our system and, just have it be plug and play or something like that. Even then, there still has to be some sort of quality assurance, quality control, so that, these things can work. Because really, and I want to say this too, it only takes 1 or 2 systems to be failing. You're talking about hundreds of thousands of colonies per 100 milliliters of water in terms of bacteria. So it doesn't take many systems failing for our beaches to fail, in terms of water quality. So again, like we have to get this right, and we have to get it right consistently. And we need ways to bring people on board who maybe aren't complying without like making their lives difficult. No. So.
Anyone else have? I don't know if you wanted to reply to her comment too about like who do you have on site? But maybe you guys can chat about that later. But we're really interested in identifying who in town is doing things well and see how we can get more people on board with that. So that's a huge thing.
Thank you again for the workshop, very instructive. My question is basically, if we look at Nosara, we have what I call Nosara Beach, Guiones, etc., and then you have Nosara Village. When I look at these systems, the dry toilet and your biogarden, they have some requirements that don't fit, I think, a majority of the houses that are in Nosara Beach. These are multi-million-dollar houses built on a land where the building occupies like 95% of the space, close to one another, etc. So how do we address those? Because I don't know what the percentage of these houses compared to the others where your system could be possible.
My quick answer there is that the option for those $1 million homes is BioNest. It's the system that requires a lease space. It drops in the ground. It's, you know, they have presence in Costa Rica. They have, you know, the materials, everything is here. So that's part of why we've been promoting that system the most, because we know that it works. I've tested the outlet of BioNest. It's really impressive. I haven't tested it for anything but bacteria yet, but people are using it. I'm happy to say that over 180 systems have been installed in the area, and 10% of those are attributable to our organization's work. So people are hearing about it and installing it, and I think it's an appealing option for that, because many of us just don't have the space, and in that case, that's really your only option. And thankfully, you know, those $1 million homes, they can afford it. I guess whether they decide to put that money down or not is another thing, but that's really the only option for those people that I can promote as is. I'd love to hear if there's other options I don't know of, but that's what most people are.
I'd like to just suggest the other option, which is that you don't build on 95% of your lot.
Thanks for saying that. I'm going to repeat that so everyone can hear. The other option is that if you haven't built yet, you should not be building on more than 70% of your lot. Ideally, it should be less than 50%. That's the option, is that we need to be realistic about when you're building a home, you need to treat the water that you're using, and it should be a part of your plan that you need to keep space on your property. And I think what's happening is that we have a lot of people coming in from other countries where there's a wastewater treatment plant, you plug your home into that, and your things go to another place where they get treated. We don't have that basically anywhere in Costa Rica. I think they're maybe working on one in the Central Valley, but in Costa Rica, you have to treat your water on your property. So you need to make room for that. Thanks for making that point.
In San Jose now it's about 20% of the houses are connected to the wastewater system.
I'm gonna repeat so everyone can hear that. In San Jose, you said 20% of the homes in San Jose are connected to a wastewater treatment plant. So the rest of those 80% still have to treat their own water. Yeah.
So yeah, in this moment, I would also love to share that there is a big initiative to organize a holistic solution as a wastewater treatment plant for Guiones Beach specifically. It's already involved with Asada. We have a preliminary site and approval, and we have a committee that is working now on the solution. It is a long-term solution, so it will take time. So we encourage everyone to take care of their water and to do the right thing right now. But as we see the future, like you said, we understand that this is a different type of problem, and a centralized solution can really help us treat the water and reuse them for different purposes. So this is something that we're working on, but we're still choosing our words and talking about it carefully because it's going to take its time. I would love to share with you some details if you have a time. We have some preliminary plans as well, and we'd love to hear more ideas too. So thank you. This one is enough.
Okay, good. So last night we were talking about that. We were going back and forth, and even though bioreactor garden is not a good solution for a limited space, that is a possibility to scale up to like acre level. So taking into consideration that the conversation of a treatment facility could be one possibility, then the bioreactor garden not being on a household level, if not being like treatment facility level, that is like a solution that definitely it been proven to work on Kihei site, right? In Kihei site in Hawaii. So, this type of technology can scale up to a level that we can treat whole cities, whole areas, which I don't think other commercial system could like, or they can, but I don't know how that could be like on a budget level. So yeah, I just wanted to.
Yeah. Well, in Costa Rica, there are some cases that there are clusters, several houses that combine the wastewater. So it's the same thing, a grease trap, chambers, and after that they convey the water to the common area, and over there is the biogarden. It works, yes, but what happens? In this kind of technology, you are responsible of the system. That's the difference. If you have a centralized system, you only have to flush and goodbye. But in that case of technologies, every house, every member of the house is responsible of that. And in the 5 cases I have seen in Costa Rica in this kind of cluster systems, the thing is that, for example, you have to keep the system in March, April, May, June, and happens that only you give the maintenance of all the systems, and after that fails. So if you want to give this step forward, you have to consider that you are going to be responsible of the residues you are producing. Okay, so there are cases in Costa Rica, Arancibia in Punta Arenas, close to Miramar. There are 2 cluster systems. In San Mateo, Alajuela, there is a cluster system. In Guasimo, that's in Limon, there is a cluster system. And after the years, the system has failed because of that. So the people start to see that, oh, I have to go there and keep and harvest the plants, or I have to clean the grease trap of everybody. So that's why the system failed. But there is something additional that we can create in this kind of systems, and we can create a business. Because, for example, all of you in your houses have this kind of cluster system, and you can motivate to locals to create business, and they have to clean the system, and you pay to them, and you increase the economy of the locals too. So there are solutions, but it's our responsibility to take care of the residues we are producing.
Thank you, Ronald.
Sorry?
And planning and community planning.
Yeah.
And you wanna like, if we're gonna like create system that unifies more than one household, then it's like you need to create community and create the community planning with itself, and with the individual development by themselves. Yeah, it requires a lot of commitment for sure.
Thank you so much. I want to encourage the conversation to continue, but I do want to be mindful of people's time and do not want to let you leave. If you do not, please fill a survey out before you leave. So please, you can keep talking, but those of you that wanted to head out or going to take just a moment, it shouldn't take more than a minute or two of your time. You can scan this QR code. If you don't have a phone or aren't able to do that, let us know and we can share it on your computer. We just want to hear from you. What you learn, how you feel about these systems. And as I said, we'll be sticking around and we're happy to continue the conversation. Just want to make sure we don't skip that step. Our contact information is also up here if you have any questions that come up later. And just as a reminder, those resources are available at sustainablenosara.com/water.